She was 97 years old in the week the world fell apart. While Britain drowned in flowers and a sea of grief swelled outside the palace gates, while a young queen was pressured to come south and bow her head and lower a flag, one member of the royal family stood apart from all of it, calm, dry-eyed, unmoved, and entirely unsurprised. That was Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. To the public, she was the smiling grandmother of the nation, the gin-and-Dubonnet national treasure who waved from the balcony. But inside the family, she was something else, the last keeper of the old code, the woman who had decided years before that Diana, Princess of Wales, was a problem the institution would have to manage and then survive. She had watched Diana arrive as the perfect bride and become the most dangerous woman in Britain. She had taken her grandson's side without hesitation, and in September 1997, when Diana was suddenly, shockingly gone, the Queen Mother's behavior, composed, traditional, immovable, was noticed by everyone who was watching closely, because while the nation wept, the oldest woman in the family did not. Let us be precise about what this story is and what it is not, because the record demands it. There is no diary entry, no minute, no servant's photograph that captures what the Queen Mother said or did inside her own rooms during the days of Diana's funeral. No transcript of that week survives in her voice. What we have is something quieter and, in its way, more telling. A lifetime of attested behavior, the testimony of the people who served her, and the considered reading of her biographers. So when we say her conduct was noticed, we mean the conduct of a woman whose composure had been a fixed point for decades, read against a nation that had lost its composure entirely. This is the interpretive consensus drawn from her known character. It is not a recording of events. Hold that distinction, because it is the whole story. Begin with the week itself. Diana died in the early hours of the 31st of August, 1997, in Paris. She was 36. By the morning, the news had crossed every border that mattered, and within days something happened in Britain that the country had not seen before, and has not seen since. The flowers came first. They came to the gates of Kensington Palace, and then to Buckingham Palace, and then to St. James's, banked higher and higher, until they lay a mile deep and began, in the late summer heat, to rot where they were laid. People queued for 6.5 hours to sign a book of condolence. By the funeral, an estimated 2 billion people in more than 180 countries would be watching. This was not mourning as the royal family understood the word. This was something closer to a national breakdown, and the institution did not know what to do with it. Consider the scale, because the scale is what the family was failing to match. Inside Westminster Abbey on the morning of the 6th of September, more than 100 cameras were trained on every face. More than 300 reporters were working the route. The coffin, lined with lead as royal tradition required, weighed close to 1/4 of a ton, and it took 8 Welsh guards to carry it slowly down the nave with a letter in 12-year-old Harry's hand resting on top, addressed simply to Mummy. Outside, hundreds of thousands of people had been standing since before dawn. The British audience alone was around 32 million, more than half the country, watching at once. Whatever the royal family chose to do or not do that week, it would be done in front of more witnesses than any single human event in the history of the island, and one of the few people in that family who seemed entirely unbothered by the size of the audience was the oldest woman in it. Here is what the official record leaves out about that family, and it is the first thing the script must get right. The criticism that fell on the royals in those first days. The bare flagpole over Buckingham Palace. The decision to take 2 grieving boys to church at Balmoral, hours after they had lost their mother. The Queen's choice to stay in Scotland while London wept. All of that was the conduct of the sovereign and her advisers. It belonged to the Queen and to the machinery around her. It was not the Queen Mother's doing. The newspapers shouted, "Show us you care," at a queen, not at her mother. And so the woman this story is about stood at one remove even from the family's own mistakes, not the author of the slights the public noticed, but the keeper of the code that produced them. What was her relationship to that grief? By the accounts of those closest to her, she was baffled by it. The biographer Gareth Russell records that she found the public outpouring more effusive than anything she had witnessed when London was being bombed night after night during the Blitz. And she had stood in that city through all of it in 1940, with the palace itself under fire. A woman who had measured grief against falling bombs looked at a nation weeping for a divorced princess and could not make the arithmetic balance. That is not the same as cruelty. It is the gap between 2 centuries standing in one room. So, who was she, this last Victorian at the center of a modern catastrophe? To understand the composure of September 1997, you have to rewind 16 years to the bride. Diana Spencer married Charles, Prince of Wales, on the 29th of July, 1981. She was 20 years old. To the world, she was the answer to a question the monarchy had been asking for a decade. A young, unmarried, aristocratic girl with no backstory, no scandal, the perfect glass into which the institution could pour its hopes. The phrase that comes down through the histories is brutal in its practicality. She was very young. She was a virgin. She had no past that could embarrass anyone. That was not described as a romance. It was described as a solution. Charles needed to marry. The family needed an heir. And here was a suitable girl who ticked every box the institution kept. The wedding at St. Paul's was watched by 750 million people, and the world saw a fairy tale. The family saw a problem solved. Almost nobody, that July morning, was looking at the 20-year-old and asking whether the box she had been fitted into would hold. And there is a thread in the histories. Tina Brown lays it out in the Diana Chronicles that the Queen Mother herself, working alongside her old friend and lady-in-waiting Ruth, Lady Fermoy, helped steer Charles toward the girl. There is a neat symmetry to it, because Ruth Fermoy was also Diana's own grandmother. The two old women, the story goes, built the match between them, but the people who actually traced the documents remembered it differently. The neat story of the matchmaking grandmothers is contested. Some accounts insist the Queen Mother and Lady Fermoy did not arrange the marriage at all, that the legend grew taller than the truth. What is not contested is the result. A 20-year-old girl walked up the aisle of St. Paul's into a family that ran on a code she had never been taught. And the oldest woman in that family was the code's most faithful keeper. What was the code? It was simple, and it was merciless in its simplicity. The crown comes first. The institution outranks the individual. You do not discuss your marriage. You do not weep where the cameras can see you. You give the public the face it needs, and you keep everything else behind the door. And you understand, always, that you are temporary and the crown is not. The Queen Mother had not inherited this creed. She had built it. She had married into the family in 1923 as a commoner's daughter, the youngest of 10 children of a Scottish earl. And for 13 years, she had been the Duchess of York, a secondary figure, the wife of the king's second son, a woman who could reasonably have expected a quiet life on the edge of the royal stage. Then, in December 1936, the edge of the stage became the center of it. Her brother-in-law, Edward VIII, gave up the throne to marry a twice-divorced American, and in doing so, he handed the crown to her shy, stammering husband, who had never wanted it and never expected it. She watched what one man's decision to put his own happiness above the institution had cost. The abdication crisis, a king forced out, a family thrown into a constitutional emergency that nearly broke it. She drew the lesson, and she never let it go. An individual who placed private feeling above the crown was a danger to everyone. She had seen exactly that danger walk out the door in 1936, and she had spent the next 60 years making sure no one inside the family ever forgot how close it had come. So she made herself into the steel spine of the monarchy. She took her reluctant husband and helped turn him into King George VI, the wartime king who stayed in London through the bombing. When Buckingham Palace itself was hit during the Blitz, she said she was almost glad of it, because now she could look the bombed East End in the face. She had reason to believe the code worked. It had taken a man who never wanted the throne and made him the symbol of a nation at war. It had taken her, a Scottish earl's daughter, and made her the most beloved woman in the country. She had tested the creed against the worst the 20th century could throw at it, and the creed had held. Why on earth would she abandon it for a 20-year-old who wanted to talk about her feelings on television? And then came a girl who did not believe in the code at all. That was the problem, and the Queen Mother saw it early. Diana was warm where the family was cool. She was open where the family was closed. She knelt to embrace sick children. She spoke about her feelings. She let the public in. To the nation, it was a revelation. To the Queen Mother, it was a danger. Not because the warmth was false, but because it could not be contained, and a monarchy that cannot contain its members does not survive. She watched the most popular royal in generations behave in ways that delighted the public and terrified the institution, and she drew her conclusion. She never warmed to Diana. By the testimony of those who served her, she never tried. Listen to the staff, because the staff saw it without the gloss. Colin Burgess served as the Queen Mother's equerry in the mid-1990s, in the House, day after day. He put it plainly, she had no love at all for the Princess of Wales. When the subject of Charles and Diana's marriage came up, Burgess said, there was a smile there, but she spoke through gritted teeth and her eyes narrowed slightly. On the matter of Charles's own conduct, her line was a closed door. Some things, she said, are best not discussed. That was the creed in a single sentence. Some things are best not discussed. It was the exact opposite of everything Diana was about to do. And Diana felt the cold coming off her. In the recollections gathered by Andrew Morton, the recollections Diana herself quietly authorized, the younger woman described the Queen Mother as always looking at her with a strange look in her eyes. She went to the Queen Mother's 90th birthday in August 1990 and came away calling it grim and stilted. They are all anti-me, she said. My grandmother has done another good hatchet job on me. And note the word grandmother. Diana meant Ruth Fermoy, her own grandmother, the Queen Mother's lady-in-waiting, the woman she believed had turned the old queen against her from inside the household. The two grandmothers who may or may not have made the match had, in Diana's telling, closed ranks against her. She was the youngest woman in the room, and she could feel the century-old door swinging shut. There was one more wound, and the brief asks us to handle it lightly, within the public record, and we will. Diana came to believe the Queen Mother favored her elder grandson, William, over the younger, Harry, invited the one to tea to talk about his future, seated him in the place of honor, and left the other to one side. Diana is reported to have confronted her over it. What followed, by the accounts that circulate, was a hardening on both sides. The old queen is said to have called Diana a liar, and Diana, in turn, is said to have called her the chief leper in the leper colony. Those exchanges are secondhand. They are reported, not recorded, and we flag them as such. But the shape they describe is consistent with everything the staff and the biographers attest. By the start of the 1990s, the Queen Mother and the Princess of Wales were two women who could not be in a room together without one of them feeling judged. Then the door that the Queen Mother had spent her life keeping shut was thrown open in front of the whole world. And her contempt, the quiet kind, hardened into something close to a verdict. In June 1992, Andrew Morton's book, Diana, Her True Story, landed like an explosion. Here was the private business of the future king's marriage, the unhappiness, the rivalry, the despair, laid out in print, and within months everyone understood that Diana had been its source. By December, the separation was announced. Then, in November 1995, Diana sat in front of a BBC camera for the Panorama interview and told some 23 million British viewers, in her own voice, that there had been 3 people in her marriage, so it was a bit crowded. To the public, it was bravery. To the Queen Mother, it was the unforgivable thing, the deliberate public dismantling of the institution from the inside. We know how she received it, because she said so, to a man she trusted. Years later, she spoke to Sir Eric Anderson, the former provost of Eton, in a long series of interviews, some 20 hours of them, that fed the official biography written by William Shawcross with full access to the Royal Archives. That biography runs to more than 900 pages, built over 6 years, and it is as close to the institution's own authorized account of her as exists. And in it, she told Anderson she had been deeply shocked. She gave him the creed in its purest form. "It is always a mistake," she said, "to talk about your marriage." There it was again. The same sentence the equerry had heard through gritted teeth. The princess's public rejection of her husband and his life, Anderson summed up, was contrary to everything Queen Elizabeth believed and practiced. Diana had done the one thing the code forbade absolutely. She had told, and there is a small, telling detail buried in the Morton material that shows how completely Diana understood who her real adversary was. In the original tapes, when Diana reached for the family member she felt had judged her hardest, she named the Queen herself. Then, by Morton's own later account, she went back and changed it. She struck out the Queen and wrote in the Queen Mother instead, out of deference to the sovereign. Even in her most unguarded confession, Diana would not put the blame on the reigning monarch, but she would put it on the old woman behind her. That edit is a small thing, a single substituted name on a private tape. It is also a map of where the cold was coming from. But the truth is quieter and colder than simple hatred. And here, the authorized record corrects the popular one, and we are bound to follow it. That same biography, the official one, does not paint the Queen Mother as a woman who despised Diana for sport. Shawcross records that she was sympathetic to the princess, that she understood the pressure Diana had faced when she married into the family so young. The objection was never that Diana suffered. The objection was that Diana told. The Queen Mother could pity the girl and condemn the conduct in the same breath, and by the authorized account she did exactly that. This is the distinction the cruder versions of this story always lose, and it is the one that makes the cold so much colder. It was not personal spite, it was principle, and principle does not bend, and it does not apologize, and it does not weep on cue, which is why, when the marriage finally tore itself apart, and Diana was cast out of the family in all but name, the Queen Mother did not rage and did not gloat. She simply erased her. After the separation, by the equerry's account, Diana became persona non grata in that household, and her name was, quite simply, no longer spoken. Burgess said he never again heard it mentioned by, or in front of, the Queen Mum. Not in passing, not in the ordinary run of conversation. And this is the line that holds the whole story, not even when he saw her a couple of months after Diana's death. The most famous woman in the world had died. The entire planet was speaking her name, and inside one drawing room in London the name was still not said. That was not an outburst. That was the discipline of a woman who had decided, years before, that the kindest thing she could do for the institution was to behave as though the problem had never existed. So now we arrive back where we began. At the week the nation wept, and we can finally read the composure for what it was. When Diana died, the Queen Mother did not change. That is the entire point, and it is why those watching closely noticed. Everyone around her was being pulled out of shape by the grief. The Queen flying down from Balmoral, then going on television live on the 5th of September, the night before the funeral, to speak to a nation that had all but turned on her. The flag going to half-mast over Buckingham Palace for the first time in history, a 400-year protocol broken in a single afternoon because the newspapers demanded it. The two boys walking behind the gun carriage through a silence broken only by hooves and the click of 2 billion cameras. Philip turning to his grandsons and saying, "I'll walk if you walk." And inside the Abbey, Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, rising to give a eulogy that turned, with the family sitting feet away, into a rebuke, calling his sister the most hunted person of the modern age, and the congregation outside breaking into applause that rolled in through the great doors. The crown was bending itself, visibly, painfully, to the will of a grieving public, conceding ground it had never conceded before. And in the middle of all that motion stood one fixed point who did not bend at all. Here is the part the photographs could never show. And we say it carefully, because it is inference and not transcript. There is no record of the Queen Mother doing anything cruel that week. She did not need to. Her composure was the statement. She was, by every account of her character, exactly what she had always been: traditional, dry eyed, certain. And the one documented flash of feeling we do have from her that week points in a direction that surprises people. According to her close friends Sir Michael and Lady Angela Oswald, the Queen Mother was hugely upset that September, not, it seems, by Diana's death, but by the criticism falling on her daughter. She was angry and defensive on the Queen's behalf. Her grief, such as it was, ran toward the institution and the woman who embodied it. The nation was crying for Diana. The Queen Mother, if she was distressed at all, was distressed for the crown. You could not draw the line between the woman and the creed any sharper than that, and we should be honest about the limits of what we can know, because the brief insists on it, and the record agrees. We do not have her words from those days. We do not have a list of cold acts to lay at her door, and the cold acts the public did notice. The silence, the flag, the delay, were the Queen's and the institution's, not provably hers. What we have is the shape of a life, a woman who for 97 years had practiced the belief that the people inside the crown are temporary and the crown is not, standing unmoved in the 1 week when the rest of the country forgot it. That is what was noticed. Not a scene, a stillness. The stillness of someone who had seen the answer coming for 16 years and was not going to pretend, even now, to be surprised by it. She was right about one thing. By her own cold measure, the institution did survive. The flag came down to half-mast and then went back up. The boys grew. The monarchy absorbed the worst blow it had taken in living memory and went on, exactly as the code promised it would, and the keeper of the code lived to see it. Diana died at 36, and the woman who had decided long before that she was a danger the family would simply have to outlast did precisely that. She outlasted her by almost 5 years. She buried her younger daughter, Margaret, who died on the 9th of February 2002 after years of failing health, and the old woman, frail now, insisted on attending the funeral anyway, because that is what the code required of her, even at the end. She outlived Margaret by barely 7 weeks, and then, on the 30th of March 2002, at Royal Lodge, Windsor, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother died in her sleep, aged 101, with her surviving daughter, the Queen, beside her. She lay in state in Westminster Hall, and the queues to file past her stretched for hours and for miles. The same kind of queue that had formed for Diana 5 years earlier, now formed for the woman who had outlasted her. At her funeral in Westminster Abbey, the tenor bell tolled 101 times, once for every year she had lived. The public who came proved the affection had been real all along. She had been loved by a nation that never quite saw the welding machine under the marshmallow. The institution she had spent a century defending stood over her grave, intact, which was, by the only arithmetic that ever mattered to her, the point. There is one strange echo at the end of it, and it is true, and few who tell this story ever mention it. The funeral that moved 2 billion people in September 1997, the cortege, the route, the order of the great Abbey service, was not designed for Diana at all. The plan the palace reached for in its panic, the operation that had been rehearsed for more than 20 years, was the Queen Mother's own funeral plan, codenamed Operation Taybridge. They buried the most beloved woman in the world, using the blueprint built for the old Queen's death. The grandmother who never accepted Diana, who would not say her name, who stood dry-eyed while the nation drowned. It was her funeral, borrowed early, that carried Diana to her grave, and the Queen Mother lived on for another 5 years after lending it. The whole world cried for Diana that September. Strangers, statesmen, a banked-up tide of flowers a mile deep, and in the middle of it stood a 97-year-old woman who did not, because she had decided long before that Diana was a danger the family would simply have to outlast. The Queen Mother had spent a century learning one lesson and teaching it to everyone around her. The crown survives, and the people inside it are temporary. Diana had forgotten that. The Queen Mother never did. She buried the most beloved woman in the world with dry eyes and a straight back, and then she lived another 5 years, the institution still standing exactly as she had always intended.